Council will call the meeting to order. For the record, it is September 26, 2023 at 4:32 PM. We'll begin this afternoon's work session with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilwoman Perot.
Here.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilman Borton.
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here.
Mayor Simmons.
Here. Next up is adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
we do have changes on our agenda for this evening. Under executive session, we will not be needing 74-2061D or 1E. We will keep 1F for our executive session. So, Mr. Mayor, I move adoption of the agenda as amended.
Second. I have a motion second to adopt the agenda as amended. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted as amended. First up is the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
move that we approve the consent agenda for the mayor to sign and clerk to attest.
Second. I have a motion second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is agreed to. There were no items moved from the consent agenda, so we will move on to item 11, which is Department Commission reports, proposed updates to Title V, Meridian City Code, fire regulations, and proposed updates to Title III, Chapter 1, Meridian City Code, general licensing and permitting provisions. Turn this over to Ms. Kane.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm Emily Kane, Deputy City Attorney. I'm continuing my march through the city code to streamline and update it. And so I have for you today two updates. The first, or two proposed updates. The first is to Title III, Chapter 1, which is the beginning chapter of the licensing and permits title of our code. So it's pretty short. The changes that I recommend are mostly for uniformity and to eliminate some potential conflicts and outdated language. So starting at the top, and I'll try to hit the highlights here. The first section talks about, I'd suggest eliminating the provision that talks about the blanket misdemeanor penalty for all licensing and permitting violations, because that doesn't apply. It's actually conflicts with some more specific provisions that we have in the code already. Moving on to page 2 of this proposed update. This is where the uniformity comes in. So this suggests having the same notice, the same appeal period, the same appeal process for all licensing issues. So if a licensee or an applicant has an issue with the action of the city, then this is the process that we would follow and that they would follow for every license that we administer in our code. So those are the highlights on that one. If there are any questions? All right.
Councilman Borton.
One question, Emily, we had talked at one of the prior appeals that sometimes we get an appeal where it's almost like a request for leniency. And I saw the provision down below. I love the uniformity. It's helpful for everybody.
Mhm.
Maybe I missed it, but I don't think it addressed that issue where folks want to appeal the denial because their felony was X and
Mhm.
have a good explanation for it. We still going to be allowing those to come to council when our hands are tied. And I feel bad having them present and then telling them there's nothing we can do.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Borton, so this update does suggest language that says no person may appeal where the grounds for the appeal are that or the decision, or that the applicant did not timely submit the application, or the application materials or fees, or just didn't submit a complete application. So that would not be permissible grounds to appeal. I know what you're talking about. That's a tricky issue because the mistakes can be made, but you're right. There's really no there's no way for council to grant leniency if the facts are what they are. So we could add that in the sections where we talk about, or where background checks are required, and we do have disqualifying criminal history. We could make that part of the code for those sections.
Councilman Borton.
It seems like it might be helpful for the applicant as well to add it to what you just read, because
Okay.
if I've got a disqualifying conviction, I might have paid the fee, I might be timely, I might be complete, but I get denied. So those triggers don't prohibit an appeal, but if we added one that also said that your application identifies a disqualifying,
Mhm.
it is tough having us, but I think they got a shot. I think that would be appropriate. 3-1-5.
Mhm.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Neri.
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to ask, and Emily, you and I hadn't talked about this, but we only had this happen once, right? With one person said it had been vacated or something. I can't remember exactly, had it withheld or whatever it was. And we said, just get the proof of it and we'll deal with it. So I don't know if there's a way you want to put language, is there a way to put language in? Because in that particular one instance, if he had simply done that ahead of time with the lieutenant, we'd have granted it. So again, the appeal was really unnecessary. He should have just followed through. And I don't know if there's a better way in the application process to make that clearer. Because I agree with you. Otherwise, it feels frustrating to everybody to come here and there's nothing the council could do to grant it. So, but that was the only one I could think of, was that one instance. And again, if he did follow through before he came to the council, we'd have granted it anyway.
Mr. Mayor, I agree. And I would suggest along those lines that we have some kind of administrative appeal or just a double check so that it's there, because there can be mistakes. It is rare, but sometimes it shows up and it's someone else mistaken identity, or it just somehow is a clerical issue. So the stuff like that, we don't need to disqualify that person, obviously, nor does council need to handle that. That can be something we handle by staff. Do that. Thank you. Okay. Second proposed update I have for you is Title V. And so this started as a, well, I won't give you the whole backstory, but the proposed plan is to move everything around. Title V is currently the fire regulations, but there is some information in there that really belongs in other sections or could appropriately be in other sections. So what I'm proposing is part of a larger picture to make Title VI a public safety title. So that would be police and fire and other public safety issues. Title V could become the Parks Code, and then we could cut 2 titles off the end of our code and make it shorter. Title 12 is currently has nothing in it. So if we were to move Title 13 up, we could shorten the tail and the whole thing would be shorter. So this is all part of that kind of master plan. So to that end, I would suggest that we move the information about the fire department and the fire chief to Title I, which covers officer appointments and department directors, and talks about their respective departments and duties. Moving on to Chapter 3, clean air regulations, which is really about burning and open burning. I'd suggest we move that to Chapter 4, which is about public health. So I would suggest that we move and renumber that. This was largely just kind of taking out some language that we don't use anymore and some that was duplicative. We don't issue burn permits at this time, so that definition is not useful to us. There's some unnecessary language. On page 4, it's adding a little information or adding one prohibition about burn bans or no burn days, which is what DEQ calls them, which would make it illegal to burn anything in the city during a burn ban. So a lot of cities do have that And I'd suggest that we add that. It also suggests that we change a violation of this code to an infraction rather than a misdemeanor. Moving on. So page 5, the fireworks code. It suggests that we move the fireworks code to Title 3, which is our licensing and permits, because it's this section is largely about issuing permits to people selling fireworks. So, and putting off fireworks shows. So some of the effort here was to make the language of this code comport with the language in the Idaho Code and the International Fire Code. So this definition of fireworks is the start of that. It mirrors the language in the state code so that they don't conflict and they dovetail for purposes of enforcement. The suggested addition is a definition of flame effects, which is kind of pyrotechnical shows. As Meridian grows, we might see some of this, and they're popular, I think, in clubs. And occasionally, talking to Deputy Chief Bongiorno, it covers pyrotechnic displays like fire dancers and other ways that people use fire to be entertaining. So we're suggesting adding that to the regulations that apply to public fireworks displays. Skipping to the bottom of page 7. Oh, this is in addition to require a new permit for each sales period. Currently, we allow people to apply for a permit to sell fireworks, and it covers them for both summer and then winter. So New Year's fireworks as well. But we recommend having 2 separate permits for that, so we can have 2 separate inspections and kind of just know that they're there is a large part of that. I'd recommend that we remove the provisions that require tax ID and social security number and driver's license number, in part to not have that information, but also in this case, we don't do background checks for fireworks stands or for public fireworks displays. So that's really unnecessary information anyway. We updated the provisions regarding site plans to conform to the International Fire Code. So section B12 here on page 8, this is language that I worked with All American to update, and I'm gonna do that in each section. So that's easier it matches up with what we need to see and what best protects the city. To the bottom of page 13, I'll point out to you that we updated the distances, separation distances from the fireworks stand to different things that might be on the site to comply with the 2024 International Fire Code. And at the bottom of page 17, one change is that we'd recommend that we not allow the use of permanent buildings for fireworks storage. That's not safe. We don't know they're there. We can't inspect that. So and it's also inconsistent with the way we regulate short-term storage containers and the storage of fireworks. Took out a provision that is already covered by Idaho Code. There is a fireworks code in Idaho Code, and it does address the liability of parents and guardians for their children's activities. So at the bottom of page 21, the top of page 22, this is the inaugural reference to that section I talked about earlier. Talks about denial procedure, appeal of denial, and it just refers everyone back to that initial chapter so that they're all the same and they'll all be like that. And finally, page 24, the police department requested that we use Idaho Code 392609 for our fireworks citations. It's just easier for them. It's already in their system. They're aware of that rather than having to sift through city code. If it's necessary, if there is a provision that's not covered by that, then we do have our own regulations, but those are the most common ones. So I'd recommend that we change that citation to reference that code section. I'd also recommend that we make it a misdemeanor to violate our codes regarding storage of fireworks and public fireworks displays. Those are really present the most danger to the public because of the concentration of the fireworks and then also the proximity of the public. But then everything else, I'd recommend that we make it an infraction. That also covers, that also mirrors what's in state code is those personal use of fireworks violations like that are $100 under the state code. They're infractions. That is it for my quick presentation.
Thank you, council. Additional questions? Councilman Borton.
Good work. That's really thorough. Having consistent process. Does amidst the material, does license holder or permit holder who has a violation that jeopardize their ability to get a license?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Borton, no, it's not, that's not part of our code. That is part of our temporary use permit code. That is a disqualifying event for a temporary use permit, but that's not the case with fireworks, though I could implement that.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
follow up on that. What's the history on that? Why wouldn't we want to disqualify somebody in that situation? Do it with the TUP. To be maybe a elevated life safety risk with fireworks. Any thought? Is that something that we just haven't discussed, haven't suggested, or is there some, this has been added about by the legal department, you guys have come to a different conclusion?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh, it hasn't been discussed thoroughly. It's largely a function of the fact that we don't do background checks on fireworks owners, or fireworks stand operators, rather. The temporary use permit disqualifier is really because that event stresses the city resources. So when it tends to be an issue when a special event goes awry, that it requires a huge response, an expensive response, and that's a burden borne by the city. So that's part of the, and it's of course a danger to the public if that event can't happen safely. So that's something we could do here as well for the same reasons. It's honestly rare, to my knowledge, that we run into issues. The fireworks stand operators really know the rules and they are compliant. And to the extent that they are not, Deputy Chief Bongiorno educates them. So that's, to my knowledge, not something that we really see and not a problem. It's not a problem that necessitates that in our experience. So it could, as I said, it could be a change that we make.
Councilman
Kind
Borton.
of a follow-up to that, and Deputy Chief, process is key, kind of how we got to this stage. And I'll probably put it to you, Deputy Chief Bongiorno, to comment on the language here and Fire's involvement in helping craft it with Ms. Kane. I presume you're involved in all of the language and drafting and what works and what doesn't. So just wanted to get some context of your perspective on all of these proposed changes.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Borton, yeah, I was thoroughly involved with this one. We, yeah, I know. This really hasn't been touched in a long time. It was well past due. And when she said it, when Emily sent it to me initially, and I just saw everything being crossed out, I was like, uh-oh. But then I realized when she explained to me, most of this is already covered in state code. So we have eliminated a ton of unnecessary language. So then we were able to actually focus on some things like flame effects, because literally we just had fire dancers over at Maddie's the other day that we have no permit for that. We don't have anything for that yet. So that was something new. And then just in case we have our Royal Daltons or whoever that wants to do a band with flame effects, okay, I think Station Nightclub Fire. Again, I wanted to make sure that with Emily that we can require a permit for that. so we can inspect it and make sure it's safe. So we covered that section and then, excuse me, even though we're not adopting the 2024 code, there was some language in there that made a lot of sense. And so I sent that to Emily as well. So she brought that into the code. So we're actually looking ahead at some things that are new that are not in the 2018 fire code. So thoroughly love it.
Council, any additional questions, comments? Ms. Kane, next steps?
The next steps are for me to put this into ordinance form and bring it back to you for adoption. You ready?
Great.
Thank you.
Council, next time on the agenda,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I move that we go into executive session per Idaho Code 74-2061F.
We have a motion and a second to go into executive session. Do I have any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Strater.
Aye.
Overton.
Aye.
Perot.
Aye.
Cavanagh.
Aye.
Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
All ayes, motion carries, and we'll go into executive session. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we are out of executive session.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Motion adjourned. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Council will call the meeting to order for the record of September 26, 2023 at 6 p.m. We'll begin tonight's regular city council meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Councilman Overton.
Over here.
Councilwoman Peru.
Here.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here.
Mayor Simmons.
Here. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd all please rise and join us in the pledge. Mr. Clerk, confirming we had no one sign up under the community invocation.
You're correct.
Okay, then with that, we'll move on to adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I move the adoption of the agenda as published.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as published. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. Next item up is, the first item is the public forum. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, we do have 4 people who signed up before the meeting. First is Nick Vernon. And then we have Megan Kelly. Austin Ader. Okay, and Derek Nelson.
Should be good. Just speaking to the mic.
Okay, I can do this. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I know it went through under the consent agenda in the work session. I was speaking tonight just to address the CLA I have before me between the city of Meridian and the Meridian Professional Firefighters. This, for me, is a big night. It's the first time I have been able to sign a contract representing the members of Local 4627. It's a big night, I think, for them. I think it should be a big night for the community. And I hope it's a big night for the city in the sense that, like, this being my first contract, going through the process of negotiation, seeing how all this works, I was definitely taken away with, a lot of hope, and that we have a really good relationship working with the city, working with the legal team, Bill Nary's legal team, working with folks in City Council, Christina Barney, with our representatives, liaisons, Pearl and Strader. The experience, I think, though maybe not as fast as we want to, was a very positive experience. And I think we worked very well together. And so, in honor of, collaboration and, working together to get through issues in a positive way towards solution, I think it was a really good experience. And so I was excited tonight to see it on the agenda, to see it go through consent agenda, and to be able to stand up here and sign it and kind of fill out it. It's my first time, so it'll be it. So with that, thank you very, very much.
Sign it right.
May clap or anything? Do I put the date and time, or you?
Hey, thank you for that amazing 3 minutes. We'll keep our meetings that short moving forward. All right. With that, was that the last one, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, that was it.
Okay, then we will move on to, first item up was a proclamation for National Cleanup Day. If I could have Eddie Garcia and the representatives from the Ocean Network Express join me at the podium. Thanks for joining us this evening. We'll go ahead and do a proclamation and then allow you to speak, give a few words on behalf of the event that you guys are promoting. Right. Whereas National Cleanup Day is a partnership with our city, local land managers, and local and national nonprofit organizations to protect the health and beauty of our city as well as our nation. Whereas the city of Meridian takes great pride in its health and beauty and supports a clean, safe environment now and in the future. And whereas a cleaner environment promotes positive community values, property values, and economic vitality of our city. And whereas the 2023 Good Clean Fun theme serves as a reminder to take care of our environment, pick up after ourselves and others, encourages pride in our community. And whereas National Cleanup Day promotes an opportunity for our citizens to join together and help our city become clean and more enjoyable. Therefore, I, Mayor Robert E. Simpson, do hereby proclaim the third Saturday of September 23rd as National Cleanup Day in the city of Meridian and encourage all residents, businesses, civic groups, government agencies, and other organizations to participate on National Cleanup Day by helping clean up their community and supporting the efforts to protect our land, water, and air. Today, the 26th day of September, 2023. So on behalf of the city, myself, city council, thank you for bringing attention to this issue, and I'd like to present you this proclamation.
Good evening. We're very excited that the city has adopted this proclamation. Ocean Network Express is an international shipping company, so impacting our communities is dear to our heart, and we are excited to be now a neighbor in Meridian and also impacting our community here locally. Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is a resolution number 23-2054, resolution establishing the appointment of Sean Lascalo to seat 3 of the Meridian Arts Commission and providing an effective date. Council, I sat down and met with applicants for the Arts Commission, and Sean definitely rose to the top in that regards. Currently, I think when it comes to relationship to the arts, currently has been a fundraiser for the Idaho Watercolor Society, and as a regular attendee of the Initial Point Gallery opens. She loves all sorts of art. Couldn't get her to really say which one was the favorite, but you know, definitely wants to focus on more art for the missing middle in arts. You know, there's lots for kids and seniors and maybe not much for those in between. So that will be Sean's focus in some regards, as well as fitting in on the commission. So with that, I'd like to put Sean before you for appointment.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I always appreciate when we get great commissioners that have such passion and enthusiasm for the area in which they're serving, and sounds like Sean's going to be a great addition. So with that, I move we approve resolution number 23-2054, appointing Sean Musacalo to seat 3 of the Meridian Arts Commission.
Second.
I have a motion, a second. Do I have discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is agreed to. I didn't see Sean. Does Sean? Nope. Okay, all right. Then with that, we will move on to our item 3, which is resolution number 23-2055, a resolution appointing Terry Darrington to seat 4 and Alan Helms to seat 5 of the Meridian Parks and Recreation Commission and providing an effective date. Terry and Alan are both here, and I don't think that they're a stranger to probably anybody on city council in that regards. I think Terry's done it all for the city one way or the other, and she's been serving on the Mayor Senior Advisory Board, and she's not going anywhere off of that. But I think this is just the next step in her evolution in getting involved in the community in a different level. Probably to our knowledge, maybe our most engaged citizen on the budget, as an example. So you may have a new budget hawk in the Parks Commission. So good luck with that, Steve, in that regards. But lives by Fuller Park and really likes Fuller, the way it integrates close to the neighborhood, and just generally an engaged citizen in our community, and not just in parks, in all aspects. And then Alan Helms, he lives, I'm not gonna say his favorite park is the golf course, because that was not his answer. But it very well could be. He does live there on the golf course. And honestly, it was important for me to find someone who had a relationship to the golf course. Since we no longer have the focus group, having someone that has at least the interest and a passion for what goes on there at the golf course was important. But he also is a fan of Fuller Park and Kleiner and Heroes. Proud of them all from that standpoint. But Alan has proven himself to be an engaged community member. And I think together they're both going to bring a lot of, they're going to both be engaged in the parks. I think that's the thing, whether it's directly with the parks or with their neighbors and others around, to bring that feedback back. So with that, these are my two nominees for your consideration for the Meridian Parks and Rec Commission.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number 23-2055, a resolution appointing Terry Dennington to seat 4 and Alan Helms to seat 5 of the Meridian Parks and Recreation Commission, and providing an effective date.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 23-2055. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is agreed to. Alan, Terry, would you like to come up and make any comments?
Mayor Simison and council members, thank you so much for your support, and that you have faith that I will be somebody who will do a good job serving in this. I'm looking forward to sitting on the commission and serving the city and the citizens of our community, and learning more and more about exactly what that commission and what that Parks and Rec Commission does. So thank you so much.
Going to basically repeat what Terry says, is that she did a very good job there. I do live on a golf course, and I am very proud that the Parks and Rec took over control of the operation on that several years ago. 99.9% of the people that live there appreciate that, even though they all have their own little opinions. But anyway, just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and we'll be working hard to serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, next item up is item 4, which is resolution number 23-2056, was the resolution appointing Kim Freeze to seat 1 of the Meridian Historic Preservation Commission and providing an effective date. It's always great to find people who have just a general interest in history to get involved and serve, especially on our historic preservation. Some people really like Meridian history. Other people just like history. And I think that that's really where my conversation with Ken really got involved. And, he talked about his Coast Guard website, which tells the story of the people of the Coast Guard, to really try to bring out that element about, history is about events and activities, but can be as much about the people who were there at the time in that regards. One of the largest problems he identified in historic preservation is most people just don't care. So how do you get people engaged in the conversation, especially if it's something that's relevant to, your downtown area that you are wanting to get people focused in on that. And an interesting fact, he is part of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. And I think that goes back to the Coast Guard connection, which is big in his past. So with that, I would like to recommend that Ken Freeze assumes the role on Historic Preservation Commission.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
my good fellow Councilmember Pro would agree. Get an opportunity to appoint somebody from District 6, you do it. And no, I kid. Ken's, to your point, Mr. Mayor, really cares about history, and I think he's going to do a great job. Like all of your appointees you've brought forth tonight, bring a lot of passion for their roles. And so I'm happy to make a motion in favor of resolution number 23-2056, resolution appointing Ken Freeze to seat 1 of the Meridian Historic Preservation Commission and providing for an effective date.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is agreed to. Ken? Didn't see him either, so, and don't see him online, so, okay. Oh, Ken, sorry. Come on, would you like to make some comments? He's looking right at you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to serve. While I was working, I didn't have time to do this sort of thing. Now I do. And I always said that I would get out and serve the community that I'm living in. And this is one way that I can do it. I'm actually hoping that I can work with even some of the other commissions so we can get some synergy going and really expand on the history of the area. And you said, I dig into history. I love it. I think it has a lot to tell us too. And I always said that if I was ever president, one of my main cabinet members would be a historian, because I'd say, what happened in the past and how can we learn from that in what we're dealing with today? And I think that the past has a lot to teach us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
Thank you. I'd like to just say, this is such a unique commission. I had the opportunity to serve as the liaison. And thank you very much for sharing your passion for history with us, because it is a really unique appointment. And from every retired friend I have, they all say they're busier now than they were when they were working. So if you have the time, we have the opportunity.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to our action items this evening. It looks like we got a crowd that wants to stick around and for this public hearing, but public hearing for Windrow, open the public hearing for Windrow Neighborhood H 2023-0031 with staff comments.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Pleasure to be here with you tonight. So tonight I will be discussing with you the Windrow project, which consists of annexation, a rezone, a preliminary plat, and a development agreement modification. The subject property consists of 65.1 acres of land, currently zoned RUT and R4 in RUT in Ada County and R4 in the city. And it's located at the northeast corner of South Linder Road and West Amity Road. As you can see here, looking at the zoning map, a portion of this property is already annexed and did annex into the city in 2015 with the South Meridian annexation property. And this particular, that portion of the site already has an existing development agreement on it as well. And I'll touch on that in my presentation. The current future land use map designation for this particular property is medium density residential, in which we anticipate 3 to 8 dwelling units to the acre. So again, the applicant is here to discuss annexing approximately 46.1 acres of land, rezoning 19.62 acres of land from the R4 to the R8 zoning district, and then subdividing the property with 252 building lots and 40 common lots. And then also a development agreement that will encompass the entire 65 acres, not just the 9.6 acres that's part of the rezone or what was annexed in 2015. As we transition from the Planning and Zoning Commission to tonight's hearing, we were able to work with the applicant and worked out a lot of the conditions that had to relate to the block length and also the phasing plan that's before you this evening here. So what I've tried to attempt for you is to share with you what the particulars are of the project and how the phasing has changed tonight. So essentially, the plat has revised not to add lots, but to mitigate some of the block lengths that we brought up in the staff report. The burgundy arrows that I show you here are the 5 stub streets that are being required as part of the project. You can see there's also a red arrow for the emergency access, which is located at the northern boundary of the site. The applicant is also proposing 3 common driveways as part of the development, which I've highlighted in purple. There is one existing home that will remain as part of the development, which will be located on this lot here that is highlighted with the yellow circle. And then the blue ring that I have around this intersection is the block length mitigation that we worked out with the applicant as we came forward to you this evening. I'd also mention to you that the plat that's before you tonight is roughly 3.87 dwelling units to the acre, which falls within that density range of the MDR designation currently. Access to the proposed development, there were 2. One is proposed from Amity and the other is from Linder Road. If you've had a chance, I know you've looked at the staff report, you can see that Amity and Linder Road are a long ways off from being widened. 2036 to 2040 is what was in the ACHD staff report. However, ACHD did require the applicant to make some modifications at both of those intersections as part of this project. So they'll have to put in a right-hand turn lane at both of those entrance points and then also center turn lanes, which is consistent with the mitigation that was required as part of their traffic study. Again, a lot of the discussion at the Planning and Zoning Commission had to do with the phasing of this project. And the reason why we spent a lot of time working with the applicant on it is we wanted to make sure that we got the appropriate street frontage improvements, amenities and open space dialed in on the earlier phases rather than the latter phases. And I know that's something important to this body. And so we wanted to make sure that we got those. So as you can see here, phase 1 will include 64 lots and include all of the Amity Road frontage improvements. And then phase 2 will include another additional 60 lots and include all of the Linder Road frontage improvements. We thought that was important since there's nothing out in that area currently because it's a 2-lane roadway. And then because there's an important amenity along the Calkins lateral, which bisects the property right through the middle, that linear green open space you see here, we've wanted the applicant to put that in with phase 3, which they have elected to do as part of that recommendation. So originally they were proposing 6 phases, and now before you tonight, they reduced 1 phase, reoriented it. And so now really the primary focus of changing the phasing was not only to get the street frontages done sooner and amenities and open space online quicker for the residents that may be living out here. So as I mentioned to you, in the UDC, we do have a limitation on block lengths. Typically, we don't want our blocks to exceed 750 feet. However, there are instances where an applicant can go beyond that. And so if you had a chance to look at the staff report, you know, a lot of these block faces do exceed the 750-foot requirement. However, under the UDC, the applicant has mitigated that with either additional open space or ped connections and have been required to add traffic calming to mitigate that. The only outstanding block length that they're asking for a council waiver and something that we can allow, the staff can't approve it's in your court tonight, is that extended block length that runs right along the Calkins south side of the Calkins lateral. So essentially in the staff report, this staff block length was approximately 1,800 linear feet. This body has the ability to grant a waiver of that. And the applicant has actually done a pretty decent job of trying to eliminate adding some curves to the road to help break that up. We had a similar situation in South Meridian called Howery Lane subdivision, where they were tying into an existing Boise City subdivision. And by the time you took where the road was extended from that side all the way to the collector road, it was over 1,700 linear feet as well. And the applicant was actually granted approval by this body to do this type of intersection that I've highlighted here to help break up that block length. We found that was an appropriate mitigation for that. We also had the applicant go back to the irrigation district to see if they would allow additional crossings, whether it be pedestrian or vehicular crossings. And response back from the irrigation district was, no, you're getting what you got. So they did not support any pedestrian facilities or another vehicular connection over over the lateral either. And I'd also mention that this waterway will remain open as well. So again, as allowed under the code, it can remain open as long as it's improved as a linear open space, which the applicant will be doing that as part of this project. So knowing all of that information, staff has worked with the applicant. We did inform the commission that we would be coming forward with a revised plat to share with you, and that the phasing would be changing as well. So again, we've met, we're comfortable with what the applicant is proposing before you this evening. These are the revised common drive exhibits as well that were required as part of the project. As I mentioned to you, there are 3 proposed. And then applicant is meeting all requirements for common driveway standards. Common open space for the site. Because this is a proposed R8 development, the UDC does require a minimum of 15% qualified open space. This particular project before you this evening is proposing 16%, so 1% over the minimum code requirement. And then as far as the amenities go, we are looking at pocket park, passive open space, sitting areas, fenced dog park, and then quite a bit of multi-use pathway as part of this project. I always tease this applicant, they like to build a lot of pathways, and this is one of those projects that is going to have a lot of pathways with it. One along Calkins Lateral, and then they'll also be required to put in 10-foot sidewalks along both of their street frontages along Lender and Amity Road as part of this development. If you had a chance to look at the staff report, and I'll go back to my graphic real quick, you can see that I've highlighted a green arrow on this particular, on the revised plat. This is one where we felt staff is recommending that they add an additional amenity in the northern portion of the development. I would mention to the council that the amenities that they're proposing exceed the current standard. So this would be above and beyond. So they're already exceeding. This would be exceeded even further if they were to add another additional amenity. And the reason why we had required another amenity in this portion of the development was the fact that their phasing plan they weren't bringing enough amenities online with their previous phasing plan. But now that they're doing more with phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, we feel pretty comfortable that the residents will get those amenities sooner rather than later. But you can see it just from our perspective, that being in that northwest corner would be nice to have a little extra there up in that corner. But again, applicant is proposing more open space and more amenities than required by UDC standards. As I mentioned to you, there is one waterway that bisects this property. It is the Calkins Lateral. Again, that will remain open. The previous plan showed another ditch that ran through this site, but after working with the applicant, it was determined it was misrepresented. It wasn't actually on this property. So that was no longer an issue. So we did remove that requirement as well. Applicant is proposing, again, single family homes on this particular development. So here's a sample of the approved elevations, which is consistent with the surrounding developments that have been approved by the city. Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval of this particular project. Testifying in favor was the applicant's representative, Heath Clark. The major topic of concern by the commission, again, was the block length that I shared with you. They were comfortable moving it forward since it was part of your decision-making process tonight. And then as far as, and that is the only outstanding issue for you tonight. And then looking at the public record, it looks like some public testimony did come in late this afternoon. So Mike and Melissa Bernard submitted some concerns, again, concerned about growth and making sure that we're planning roads appropriately. And then Sherry Stiles from Engineering Solutions, who represents Brundage Estates Development to the north, is not opposed to the project, but just recommending that those lots that touch Brundage Estate remain R4 and provide similar lot sizes. If you had a chance, if you look at the layout, I've looked at the testimony and I was trying to analyze that for the applicant. But the Calkins Lateral actually is a 51-foot easement between this project and that Brundage Data project in this general location here. So there is adequate separation, at least in this portion of the development. So with that, I think I'll just conclude my presentation and stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Bill. Council, any questions for staff?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. I think regarding we did get a comment in kind of late in the day, but I thought it was interesting from Melissa Bernard. And I think part of the comment was regarding collector roads if there's sort of been adequate planning done here. And I just wondered if you could address that specifically.
Mayor, members of the council, happy to. So on our, we work with ACHD, and part of our, we negotiate what the master street map is, and those collectors are added to our GIS layer. So we do work closely with them. We do have them planned out, and they're just in this particular project here, the collector roadway is just adjacent to the east a little bit farther. So it's aligning more at the mid-mile than at the quarter mile in which she had provided in her testimony. So again, the streets are planned. They can move. They don't have to exactly be at the half-mile mark, but we do work closely with ACHD to make sure that we are getting adequate collector road system in place.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
And just maybe one comment. I think if we could point people to where they can look at the master street map, that always helps, as people are doing their research. I believe it's on the ACHD website. I
That
was
is correct.
Googling it.
And we have someone from ACHD on the line tonight too, if you want them to chime in on that comment as well. Councilwoman Schrader.
Thank you. I'm okay right now. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Pro.
Thank you. Bill, in regard to the lot length, excuse me, what are other alternatives that we can do to mitigate the concern? Traffic calming. I mean, there are things that we can make, that we can request of the applicant. I don't know that we can necessarily require them as part of the DA, but do you have suggestions to us as a staff member of how we might make that decision in a context that is manageable for the concerns that are created?
Mayor, members of the council, I can let you know what the code allows. In this particular case, a few years ago when we modified code, we knew there would always be instances where X, Y, and A, B, C options may not work. This is one of those particular cases where some of these block links are 850, close to 1,000. So not too far off from the 750 feet. But the code gives us latitude and you latitude to say you want more pedestrian connections to break up the block length. You can do it through an alley. You can do it with a common open space lot. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a pedestrian lot. And so, or you can do a traffic calming, or you can do a combination of all those things. But where there's an instance where you have a ditch or some topography or something that just cannot be mitigated with all of those things I just described, then it really does come down to your purview and your waiver. And so what we try to do as staff is make sure that we're getting the appropriate traffic calming measures, the appropriate open space, and in this particular case, adjusting the intersection so that it curves enough so it does help break that up and get some stop signs in so people at least stop and it's a controlled intersection. And we try to mitigate people racing down that or breaking up that block just by stopping and making it a controlled intersection. So again, as I mentioned to you, there's going to be traffic calming that's required as part of this project. ACHD has required it, staff has required it. Now all we're left to is for this body to approve this one street configuration, which is Street L, I believe. Is it L or M? J? I think it's Street J, excuse me. And so again, if you guys are comfortable with what's being proposed with the emergency access, which will again act as a crossing and access to the pathway. And then also this road connection, if you guys are satisfied that that meets the requirements and that intersection works, that's definitely within your purview tonight to grant that waiver. But that's the situation we have. We have no other way to provide a connection based on the information that we've received from the applicant and the irrigation district.
Council, additional questions for staff? Okay, then would the applicant like to come forward?
Members of the council, good to see everybody. Heath Clark, 251 East Front Street in Boise, representing the applicant. And I do have a presentation that it looks like Bill has already got up for me here. So, oh, sorry, you got it. There we go. So again, we are here to talk about the Windrow Acres neighborhood tonight. And this is property that's located at the corner of Linder and Amity in Southwest Meridian. There's a couple of themes that I want to emphasize as we begin. And one of those is that this is truly the completion of a square mile. It's developing from east to west, from Meridian Road toward Linder. And second, that there's been significant city investment in infrastructure, water, sewer in this area, all of which followed from the South Meridian annexation and the annexation agreements that were entered into several years ago. And so this is part of the completion of that larger plan. So as we start from the comprehensive plan, the area is planned as medium density residential. We're proposing a 3.9 units per acre density. That's on the low end of the 3 to 8 that would be planned for under the city's planning documents. And this is the annexation map. It shows that a portion of our project is already annexed, with the remainder having contiguity to the annexed city property on the north. And that annexation is very important. This is a picture that came from the development agreement that was signed in connection with the South Meridian annexation of 1,322 acres back in 2016. You can see our property in the northwest corner where the arrow is pointing. And here's another view, and along with a picture of how this relates to CUNA's growth on the southwest flank of the city. And I'm using the word flank purposefully there. There are a couple of elements to this annexation that are, I think, key to this decision. First, that annexation was consensual, so it was done through negotiated development agreements. And second, that there were significant city commitments and investments in the area as a result of those agreements. So if we look at the 2016 agreement, our predecessor in interest signed an agreement with the city that included the language that you can see on the screen. Among other things, it calls for, quote, advancement of sewer and water infrastructure, utility infrastructure for the benefit of the subject property, the city of Meridian, and adjacent and adjoining properties. So those benefits would be in the form of utility extensions that would take place over the course of 2 years and 4 years, depending on the phase. And finally, as that infrastructure is built out, with the properties would develop with zoning consistent with their flume designations. And this is all discussed at some length in the staff report. I'm just trying to hit the highlights. So as you look at the utility concept plan, this is from the annexation. You can see that the maps show the extensions in 2 phases, phase 1 in blue, phase 2 in pink. Our project is part of phase 2. And as you can see from the Public Works comments that were included in the staff report, those systems have been installed and are directly adjacent to the site. Here's mapping showing where those lines are located. The city has constructed the water main that rings on the outside of our property. You can also see that the city has constructed a sewer main that is adjacent to our site, and we will be taking that down to, let me see if I can get the cursor to wake up. There we go. Down to a new lift station that is located precisely where the city called for on the city's sewer master plan, which you can see here. The lift station is exactly where the city had planned for. So to summarize, what you're seeing tonight is fulfillment of work that the city's been working on for most of the last decade. Landowners made commitments to the city to annex. The city made commitments to those landowners to bring utilities to their properties. Both sides lived up to their bargain. And there have been significant investments in utilities to make this area ready for development. And as I mentioned, the square mile is finishing out accordingly. Again, development moving from east to west. So with that in mind, talk a little bit about the project, look at the site and the site plan. 64 acres planned are zoned at R8 with 251 homes and 16% open space. So with all the zoning and the density, everything is consistent with the flume designation of MDR. There is significant open space, great pathway and trail amenities. You can see the regional pathways in red. That will be both on the exterior of the project and along the lateral, which will be a really great amenity. All of that will interconnect with several parks throughout the property, including a central dog park. As Bill mentioned, the amenities exceed code. They have the play park, the dog park, pathways, shaded seating areas, These are some more examples of what that looks like. And again, we exceed the amenity requirement at 15.5. Bill showed you the homes, lot sizes from 4,700 square feet to 10,000, homes in the range of 1,350 to 2,750 square feet. Now, Bill covered a lot of this, so I'll just kind of hit highlights as well. We've worked, we like to pride ourselves on having a good relationship with staff. We were able to meet with staff and do a few things, including updating the phasing plan. So the highlights with that was that moves up the Linder frontage, moves up the amenities. In fact, the amenities with this new phasing plan, we get 14.5 out of the 15.5 amenities in the first 3 phases, which is important as we look at the question about the additional amenity up top. We did modify the street section with the intersection change here, and Bill's being modest. It was actually Bill's idea. And we're happy about that. And so we do think that breaks up that block length. In addition, there's, when you read the code, there's some, I think what it might contemplate is like an alleyway that's unbroken for a block length. You might think of that when you're picturing something that's longer than 700 feet, when in fact we do break up the block length on each side as you go down the project. So for example, as you go down, man, that mouse is moving slow tonight. As you go down here, this gets broken up on this side with open space and with the emergency and pedestrian bridge. And then it's broken up down here with this access, and it's broken up with those green spaces. So we have made efforts to try to address that, but that is largely a function of topography. With the Calkins lateral there, you want to meander the road, and you don't have as many options to be able to break it up, particularly given Boise Project's position on additional crossings. But that meandering is in and of itself a traffic calming measure. And then we would also be looking at traffic calming in the form of bulb outs, the stop sign at the traffic intersection, and then continuing to work with staff and ACHD to identify additional traffic mitigation. Or calming, I should say. We did add the 3 pedestrian connections that were requested, and we got the confirmation from Boise Project that was also requested with regard to that additional crossing. So, at this point, we are in agreement with everything that staff has in the report, with just one item to discuss, which is condition 3G. And so what this refers to is a request for an additional amenity on lot 10 of block 8, which I just showed you on the screen. And largely, as I understand it, that was based on timing. Staff was wanting to make sure that those residents in that area of the project had access to amenities earlier on. With the change in the phasing plan, we believe that's largely addressed. So let me show you what I mean by that. So at this point, with the change in the phasing plan, we have phases 1, 2, and 3 that'll come online before we touch phase 4. With phases 1, 2, and 3, we'll have 14.5 of our 15.5 amenity points already online. And lot 10, block 8 itself is a half-acre park. You can see, although it may not qualify for an amenity point, in any sense of the word, it is an amenity to those folks. So the reason that we're requesting that is that we think the timing issues have been addressed. We'll have 14.5 of the 15.5 amenity points online before any residents are there in phase 4. And again, our amenity counts already exceed code. So with that, I would be happy to open this up for questions and see if I can answer any the council might have.
Thank you, Heath. Council, any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pearl.
Thank you very much for a thorough presentation. Did you or have you discussed with planning staff the improvements along Amity and Linder being done in phase 1, or is there concern about that on your part?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Perot, we have discussed it. Doing all the improvements along Amity and Linder in phase one would make for one massive phase. And in this case, what we're talking about is development that is proceeding from the east to the west. We want to get the Amity improvements in first and then move to Linder. But what we did do was to change our phasing plan so that we moved all of that into phase two. So we did move up the Linder improvements. We just, with any project, we need to make sure that it's being done, to address traffic issues and all of that, but also to be viable financially. And so we tried to compromise with staff by moving Linder up, but not making one massive phase out of phase one.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Schrader.
thank you. You could go back, if you don't mind going back a couple of slides to the sort of overall plan for the development. I think part of the concern and what I wanted to understand is you have this really large stretch, and I can see that we've made kind of a turn to address that and break that up. I think we said it was over 1,000 feet. And it looks like the home's actually front on that. Can you talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing specifically along that stretch, whether it's bulb outs or what have you, speed bumps, just maybe walk us through in like a little more detail. I think it's different when you have a development where you have kind of a collector set up and then the homes aren't facing it. Here, I just worry it's such a long stretch and the homes look like they're facing it.
Correct. Yeah, Councilmember Strader. So yes, the homes will face it. This is a local street. And so what we've been looking at again, or we believe that this breaks up that piece of the block length here with the new intersection. So really what we're talking about is, this area here, this area down here. We've broken that up with this, we have a pedestrian connection here. We have the green space here. This ends out on a park end cap. You've got this is not a straight shot, which in and of itself will slow down traffic. This piece is meandering, so that will also slow down traffic. You'll have, in addition to what we anticipate would be stop signs here, if there would be likely as well bulb outs at all of the intersections to slow things down. And then from there, to the extent that additional traffic calming would be required, we'd go through the process with ACHD, and that might include speed bumps. You have to really work hard with ACHD to get a speed bump, as I'm sure you're aware.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Yeah, from what I understand, they've actually improved the process. But maybe you could just go into more detail. So like you just mentioned a pedestrian connection. Maybe I'm just not following where that is at.
This leads into our park down here.
Okay, and so would there be like a crosswalk there or something? Is that what you're expecting? Just because I feel like if I want to give you credit for the green space mitigating the traffic, I want to know, like, is there a crosswalk there, or what will be there that will sort of slow people down?
So we would work with ACHD to try to look at a crosswalk there, but there would be bulb outs where it enters the sidewalk as well. Aaron just reminded me.
Okay, so bulb outs and maybe a crosswalk if it seems like it would make sense because that's one of your main amenities. Okay, and then I can see that it meanders. That kind of begs the question too, what is the radius of that curve? It's kind of hard to tell. Would there be an issue also with people being able to see as they kind of come around that? It's not quite a corner, is it?
No, it's not a corner. So you're not going to have the type of visibility issues. Frankly, when we were looking at this, that was one of our questions here, was whether we would have a visibility issue at that corner and whether that would work. But as you continue down here, there's enough of a meander that it's going to slow folks down, but not enough that you would create visibility issues. But I don't have a specific angle for you on that.
Okay. It seems like if we had something, to sort of give you some ammo to discuss more with ACHD, even just coming from the council about the importance of some of that traffic calming and the pedestrian connections, it seems like that's going to be a really important part of making this successful. So at least I think we should really try to help you as much as we can to make sure that they understand that's a priority. At some point at the appropriate time, I would love to hear from ACHD directly. But I don't want to interrupt you right now while you're taking questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Keith, I'm glad we're on this slide. It'd be my eyes, but I'm noticing two shades of green for your open space, one that looks like Councilmember Hoagland's yard, one that looks like my yard. Well, let's stick with the lighter shade of green. Can you help me understand what that's meant to communicate?
Councilmember Cavanagh, so that this is for purposes of counting the open space. So the dark green is what counts, the lighter green is what doesn't.
That was my assumption.
Yeah.
Do you know off chance, sorry, Lauren, I know you sat down, what your total open space would be if we counted the unqualified?
Let's say 17.
So, Mr. Mayor, one more if I may.
Councilman Cavanagh.
My other question is about, kind of along the lines of Councilmember Strader's about pedestrian connectivity. And you touched on a point that I really appreciated, that this kind of completes that square mile. But there is a missing piece of the puzzle, which is that hard corner right there at Linder and Amity. My assumption is you don't own that land. Has there been any conversations with the landowner about completing a sidewalk around that corner? I hear it all the time. I've experienced that frustration. You get to the edge and then you're stumbling through dirt and just trying to figure out what the right mousetrap is to solve that, to really complete that corner for our citizens.
Yeah, Councilmember Cavanagh, and Laren may have more to add to this, but no, we don't own or control it. There is a roundabout that's planned for that location. And part of what is included in ACHD's staff report is for us to do our alignment to allow for that roundabout to come in. So we've accommodated for the roundabout, but unfortunately, because we don't own it, we can't control when that connection would come in.
That'll be always up. Mr. Mayor, additional question.
Councilman Cavanagh.
So in light of that, recognize that's not a problem that even if you wanted to, it was probably not timely enough that you can solve. And we saw that a lot here in South Meridian.
Mhm.
Is there an opportunity then to do some type of a temporary dirt pathway that goes along the inside along your property? What I don't want is somebody, is walking down Linder and they want to get to Amity and now they've got to trudge either through the road or they've got to kind of cut through that lot, which I don't assume the current landowner, I think there's a house there if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember. Maybe the house is gone. Okay, but wouldn't want people maybe trudging through. I'm trying to figure out what the right solution in that, recognizing that it's gonna be a long time before that roundabout is ever complete.
Yeah, Councilmember Cavanagh, that's a good question. It's one that I don't think I have an answer that would not require the use of somebody else's property. Because otherwise what we're doing is we're putting, a trail through the back of folks' backyards as we're trying to develop the property. Perhaps what, we could, maybe it's signage. Yeah, Jim, Mr. Conger makes a good point, and that I just want to state for the record is that part of the benefit of this moving forward and putting the lift station in, dropping that stub road in is that actually tees that corner lot up for development. So, one thing that may be a benefit to all of this is that once that's in place, it sets the stage for that to sell more quickly. But again, it's a very difficult thing to try to control the use of somebody else's property. And that regional pathway really needs to go on the exterior along those roads. So
I agree permanently, that's where it belongs. It's like a missing puzzle piece that we've got to figure out. All right. Well, thanks, Heath. I appreciate it. I don't have any more questions right now, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman, additional questions for the applicant? Okay, well,
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Councilman
I
Hoagland.
did have one question, Heath, and that's related, you mentioned about the pathway across the waterway there, but also an emergency access point.
Mhm.
Yeah, right there. So it sounds like that's going to be a fairly large pedestrian walkway if it's emergency access as well. Can you explain a little more detail on that?
Yeah, so Councilmember Hoagland, so what we're dealing with here is that we need to have a secondary access as we move forward with our phasing plan. Once these additional accesses or the property next to us develops, then that emergency access across there is no longer necessary. So what we were able to do was to identify an emergency access here that will ultimately be converted to a PED access. And remind me. So we're talking about a 14-foot access up there. So we're not talking about a 4-lane road that's going across. It's something reasonable that would allow for an emergency, a temporary emergency condition. And I don't think 14 is right now that I say that out loud. 20, yeah. 14 didn't sound right, but sometimes I go wrong burgundy and you just put the teleprompter in front of me and I say what I gotta say.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
count on me to think of something. So there, we received a letter, which I'm sure you saw, from the owner to the north, developer to the north, regarding the lot sizes and how they will line up. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Councilmember Pro. So we just saw it. It just came in, I think at like 5. So the request, as I understand it, was to make our northern lots, excuse me, match up with theirs and drop our essentially drop our density. We went and looked and they actually have 24 lots against us and we have 28. So there really is not a significant difference between these. They actually transition very well. Plus as Bill mentioned, you have the canal transition. So we think what we've done in there is appropriate. And then again, if you look at our overall density, we're on the low end already of the 3 to 8, or being at 3.9. So we think it would be appropriate to go with what we'd planned for in the transition that we had identified. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Schrader.
would it be possible for us to hear from Christy as well?
It would be a problem because Chrissy is no longer our connection point. I was going to bring her on as soon as we were done with Heath and introduce you to our newest person, Miss Brooke Green. Any further questions for Heath? Okay, Brooke, if you can hear us or be brought in to the conversation.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
You can. Thank you for joining us. Councilwoman
Fabulous.
Schrader, would you like to ask your questions specifically?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Brooke. Welcome. We're really happy to have you with us. A question for you. Can you walk us through on the master street map where that mid-mile collector would be? Just so we can understand kind of how the flow of traffic would ultimately work in this area.
Give me a moment. I wasn't anticipating that question, so.
Fair enough.
Let's see if I can pull up my map, and I may have to follow up with you as I don't. The mid-mile. Goodness, I can't pull it up. Give me a moment. Councilwoman, to keep not delaying it, can I go ahead and follow up with you with that question? It's in an email to all of you.
Couldn't hear you, Brooke.
To not delay any further as I try to search for that as I end. Can I follow up with you?
Yeah, if you want to look at that information, we'll see if there's any
Yeah.
other questions right now to specifically. Do we have any additional questions for Brooke right now besides that? Councilman Cavanagh?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh?
Again, if Brooke's able to look, and I don't know if ACHD has the right of way already for that hard corner. What the needs in that would be. If there's any opportunity for even a temporary pathway on that corner to connect pedestrians.
And it's really nice to have her as our liaison, as an aside.
Thank you, Councilwoman and Mayor. Certainly something we can look into. And you're talking about the Amity and Linder corner
Yes.
for a temporary pedestrian pathway. Certainly, we can look to, and we've done it in several locations, we can look to temporary solutions to help with that. Especially seeing that that property hasn't entered into development yet. It's something we can pursue in the future.
Brooke, while you're looking at the questions for Councilwoman Schrader, we'll go and see if there's additional testimony. We can come back to you. All right, Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone sign up?
Mr. Mayor, we did not.
Okay. Is there anybody present who would like to provide testimony on this application at this time? If you would like to come forward or use the raise your hand feature on the Zoom call. Seeing no one wish to provide testimony, Brooke, it's back in your court whenever you're ready.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm gonna go ahead and have to delay the answer to that. I certainly don't have the answer readily available. And I apologize.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Brooke, can you see my screen? I'm sharing our GIS map, so you can see master street map later on, if that helps.
Certainly, can you go ahead and repeat that question so I don't answer it incorrectly?
Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Yeah, and Brooke, you're welcome to take and assist a phone a friend from Bill Parsons as well. But I think the question was just, could you kind of walk us through where the mid-mile collector is intended to be in this area? So we could sort of see where everything will connect in. Okay, he's pointing to it. Well, that's interesting. Thanks, Bill. So yeah, I was trying to figure out where will the property itself connect? Doesn't.
So why don't we go into, let's go and take, we're having some other computer issues. So why don't we take we'll reconvene at 7:15. So we'll split the difference between, give us 12 minutes. So Brooke, if you have any, I'll let you communicate directly with Bill or others if you need to, and we'll come back at 7:15. So we stand in
Mayor,
recess.
I appreciate the recess.
Thank you.
Brooke, if you can hear us, Bill Parsons is trying to reach you. If you want to email him your contact information, he tried to call your office. It's bparsons@meridiancity.org.
All right, council, we'll go ahead and come back from recess. We'll start with Brooke, if Brooke is back on, if she feels like she's got the information she was looking for.
Mayor and council, thank you for providing me a little bit of grace as we look for this. And to your staff who helped me out, what you're looking at before you is the master street map and the residential collector that is identified the min-mile. And I'll let him go ahead and run the cursor to indicate where that's at. As you can see with the proposed development, there is no connection to it. And I think one of your other councilwomen identified that or highlighted it. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Thank you, Brooke. So, we have this development and then there's another piece that is just adjacent to where the new collector would be. Do you guys already know kind of what sort of connection would happen there? Or like what level of planning do we have that sort of goes into it?
Mayor and councilwoman, I don't have that plan development before me to give you an indication where there's any connections. Certainly it's something once that's put before me, I can go ahead and follow up with you.
Okay. Well, at least for the moment, it doesn't look like, somebody would be racing through this development to hit that mid-mile collector. It would be quite a journey, it looks like. Okay.
Mayor and councilwoman.
Brooke, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
I guess just if you had any additional comments about the traffic calming measures that are needed, hopefully you kind of followed the conversation, but there are several kind of long stretches of roadway that are longer than we normally allow. And so, the applicant is interested in using bulb outs but it does seem like having a crosswalk in there would be really important. Maybe having speed bumps would be important. Is there anything we can do to help encourage that or work with you guys up front to make some of those things happen?
Mayor and councilwoman, that was actually the question I was hung up on and ready to answer. And yes, I'd be happy to provide some insight. As we ask with several of our applicants when they bring proposals before us, we do ask that they take into account traffic calming. As highlighted, you have got let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. You have street A, B, C, J, and L, who all do exceed that 750 feet in length. Traffic calming that we oftentimes recommend is everything from horizontal curbs, bulb outs, chicanes, chokers. These are typical applications that you see already in the valley. Some additional new treatment options that are being considered. Raised crosswalks are something that provides for pedestrians to be able to be lifted up into the space so they could be seen. So that is one element. We do recommend that the applicant come back to the table and have that further discussion with our development team pertaining to traffic calming.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
That's really interesting because I think that these traffic calming measures would be really important in a development like this. So is that a conversation that ACHD usually has before you provide your approval? Or when do you how do you make sure that, it happens? Because it's interesting, I think from what you're saying, this is kind of on the applicant to provide the traffic calming measures, but it sounds like on your end, you have recommendations. I'm unclear as to for example, with a crosswalk, is ACHD the entity that requires the crosswalk? Or do you expect that the applicant could proactively offer to do one? How would a crosswalk work? It's just an example.
Mayor and councilwoman, we did ask that the applicant required to submit a revised preliminary plat with some of these redesigned elements, especially for these longer stretches of roadways. We do ideally like to see these elements added in at the original plat. What we don't want to do is have to come back at a later date to provide traffic calming because that wasn't taken into consideration early on. To your point about working with the applicant, we'll continue to do so to provide some of these traffic elements and to see some mitigation efforts for speeding through this whole area.
So, Mr. Mayor. So just in the interest of communication, because I think where I'm getting hung up is like Heath is saying, hey, you know, if we need speed bumps, there's a separate process to apply with ACHD to go and get that later. And I think what I'm trying to understand is, are there things that the applicant can do now with the revised preliminary plat that you guys could go ahead and approve? You know, are speed bumps like different than the other measures that you mentioned?
Mayor and Councilwoman, speed humps are not a preferred traffic calming. And we do highlight that in the staff report. We do ask that the applicant look to consider other type of traffic elements, especially for those longer stretches. And so we do want to encourage them to come back and to provide some additional bulb outs, which they do identify, and they highlight that this evening. But we want to continue to have that conversation with them to be able to ensure that that pedestrian safety is taken into account.
Mr. Mayor.
Administrator.
Sorry, I feel like I am beating this one to death, but just maybe one more question, just so I can understand. So is a crosswalk something that's within the applicant's control, or is that like a speed bump where ACHD needs to separately approve that?
Mayor and Councilwoman, that is in the applicants make suggestions for crosswalks in their development.
Okay, thanks.
Council, any further questions for ACHD at this time? Any further questions for staff before we ask the applicant to come back up and close? And do one more call for anyone from the public who'd like to provide testimony on this item. Okay, then would the applicant like to come up and close?
Members of the council, Heath Clark, 251 East Front Street in Boise. So just to kind of maybe follow up on some of the conversation, I keep wanting to say with Representative Green, but with ACHD staff. We did resubmit our preliminary plat with the changes that were requested in the ACHD commission action. And so as we move forward, what we understand the process to be and what we expect to happen is that when we get to the construction drawing, construction plan review stage, that the specifics of, you know, where a bulb out goes and, you know, where an apron is and all of those sorts of traffic calming items would be specifically identified in connection with those construction drawings. And so, you know, to Councilmember Strader's point, you know, we would love to include in your approval that we would like to see you move forward with additional traffic calming that might include X, Y, and Z, and to discuss that with ACHD in connection with your construction plan review. And I think that would be an appropriate approach here. Otherwise, I don't know that there's much else for us to rehash, and so I'll get out of the way. Just as a reminder, the one item that we did ask for council's direction on was to the removal of the additional amenity requirement on condition 3G. So.
All right, thank you. Council, further questions, comments for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Just to be sure, Keith, on your request for remove conditions, it still will be built, but it will just be in phase 4 and not in the first 3 phases. Is that correct?
Councilmember Hoagland. So yeah, this is part of the conversation there. So we're not proposing to modify our half-acre park. Like it will be there. The request from staff in condition 3G was to add another amenity on top of that. And so our request was to let's stick with code. You know, we've already exceeded code and all those amenities are going to be in phases 1 through 3 before we even have any residents in phase 4 up there.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
just to make it crystal clear. So
Yep.
Keith, if we eliminate 3G, you still meet and exceed the requirements.
Councilmember Overton, that's correct. We do.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Schrader.
Heath, do you have any issue with trying to put in a raised crosswalk or a crosswalk that would kind of break up that large? Yes, where the, I can't tell if I'm just doing that on my screen.
I keep
Other people.
trying to help Bill and I get in his way.
Okay. Not that like you're required to, but use your best efforts to put one in, because this is the stretch that honestly gives me the most heartburn and is concerning with all these houses fronting on it. It sounds like AC, it's hard to kind of know how, it sounds like during construction, you guys hash this out, but are you guys open to using your best efforts to put something like that in there to help slow things down and make it safe for people?
Councilmember Schrader, yes. And
Okay.
let me just point out one thing too, is that when this intersection goes in, that actually does break per code, that breaks the block. And so when we're talking about the block lengths and several of the streets being longer than the block length, I don't know that that's accurate on one side of the street maybe, but there are intersections that are breaking these up. So what we're really talking about, I think, is this area, and we're happy to work with, to try to get a crosswalk in that location.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think it would help a lot.
Yep, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Deputy Chief.
Mr. Mayor and Councilwoman Schrader, I just want to point out, raised crosswalks are bad for the fire department. It's a speed hump is what you're doing. You've just created a speed bump for us to have to deal with. And I know and not to step on Ms. Green's toes, but I know Ada County Maintenance hates them because you can't plow up and over them. So they become a maintenance nightmare. So I would rather work with bulb outs, narrowed roadways. That's typically something that I have to approve when their plans come in for final plats and stuff. I approve those narrow bulb outs and stuff at the intersections, because when they neck it down, we have to make sure we can still get the fire engine around there.
Mr.
I
Mayor.
would much rather have that than a raised sidewalk.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Yeah. I don't think the only options in the world would be like a raised crosswalk or a bulb versus a bulb out. I'm sure you could have a regular crosswalk. That could be another way to address it. Or maybe there's a special type of paint. I don't know. I don't want to like get into the details this much. You know what I'm saying though? Like whatever works for the fire department, that works for everybody, that is the safest version you can do, that also is workable, is greatly appreciated. But thank you for, I did not know that. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Councilmember Schrader, we appreciate the direction. I think there's a menu of options there. You know, we can do, because we have that green space, we could still do a bulb out there and keep the 24 feet. You know, I think the world's our oyster to figure that out. And I think that we understand council's direction on that.
Council, any additional questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
seeing no more public testimony, I'd move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion, a second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it and the public hearing is closed.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
I'd like to take at least a first shot at this. After considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, I move to approve file number H 2023-0031 as presented in staff report for the hearing date of September 26, 2023, removing condition G and providing a waiver of block length on Street J in order to mitigate traffic flow.
Second for conversation.
We have a motion, a second, and recognize Councilman Cavanagh for discussion.
Councilmember Overton, just want to make sure I heard you right. I think you said condition G, but I think you meant condition 3G.
First degrees.
Okay. Second will also do.
Okay, duly noted. Is there discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, real quick. I was listening to the presentation, looking at the plan. I thought, I've seen one of those intersections before, and it took me a while to come up. And it's the back way to my kids' home. It's Apgar Creek, and it works pretty well because that is one long stretch coming from Linder Inn. Then you got this little curve thing like that, and then it's another long stretch. And this is probably the days before they thought they should curve things, but it does work and it gets people to stop, slow down. It changes the line of sight and everything's there. So yeah, so I have that experience with that quite regularly, and it does work. So thank you, Bill, for that suggestion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Schrader.
just to comment a little bit on the application. It is a little bit on the fringes. It's kind of on the outer edge of where we put in our infrastructure, but our infrastructure is there. We've already made that investment. I think that's really important to keep in mind. The density feels appropriate for the area, which I think is also important to keep in mind. And I do appreciate if it's not a requirement, but if we can just add commentary in the development application that the city would encourage the applicant to consider, additional traffic calming measures like we discussed. I think they heard that anyway. So that's important to me, I think, to make it workable.
Any additional comments on the motion? Right, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Strainer,
Aye.
Overton.
Aye.
Burrow.
Aye.
Cavanagh.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries. The item is agreed to. Thank you very much. Council, anything under future meeting topics? Or do we have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, I move we adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. You guys have it. We're adjourned.